Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Please be seated. We find ourselves this fourth Sunday of Lent in another parable, the story of the prodigal son. This is the longest and perhaps most well-known of all of Jesus' parables. And of course, we know the story, but how we interpret it depends on which side of the fence you are on. The side of the goody two-shoes son, or the side of the bad boy. And some of us are a little of both. We know that the often understood meaning of this story is that the father who welcomes back the bad boy with open arms represents God. God welcomes us back to God's embrace no matter what. Oh, maybe we don't want to admit it, but for some of us, rewarding the bad boy sticks in our craw. We hate to hear how the younger son was welcomed with a party, no less. And the good son, the ones like us, who has stayed by his father's side, knocking his brains out to maintain the family farm, is embarrassed for resenting his brother. But those of us in that goody two-shoes camp, we get him. The elder son says to his father, "For all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. But you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But then when this son of yours comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." We secretly cheer on this elder son. He appears entirely justified in being upset about the party for his arrogant brother. This younger son took his share of what he would have inherited and squandered it. But the elder has done his father's bidding, and he would have been rewarded. Had the younger son not returned, he would have continued to work his father's farm and would have inherited the farm upon his father's death, as was the custom. It is likely that now that his brother's inheritance has been squandered, that the remaining assets would have been shared by them. So it is no surprise that the elder is upset. And after leaving his family and spending his inheritance, finding himself penniless, the younger son takes a job with another landowner, feeding the pigs. There could not be a more humiliating job for a young Jewish man. Eating pork was banned by the Jewish dietary laws, so tending pigs would have been the lowest of the low, probably worse than being a drug dealer today. And his job still left him hungry. The younger son has thought, "My father's workers are fed better than me, so I will return to my father." But it doesn't look to me like the younger son has done anything like repentance here. He plans what he's going to say to his father. He says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." And we wonder about this father who would so willingly and lavishly welcome his younger son home. This would have seemed silly in the first century, and surely would have drawn some criticism in the community. It would have made sense, don't you think, that the father would at least have hollered at the younger son? He would have worried about him. But when the father sees his son, he runs to him. And the son recites the words that he has practiced, his father embraces him and orders a feast. The father doesn't act like we think he should. It is interesting that at the beginning of this passage, the beginning words are that tax collectors and sinners were coming to hear Jesus. It was the Pharisees and the scribes who grumbled. This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. It is those words that prompt this parable. Today, most of us tend to read this parable from the lens of the elder brother. But at least some of those people in the crowd hearing that story would have resembled the younger son. People who were judged for their questionable occupation or their unsavory behavior. If you have never been a bad boy or a bad girl, it may be hard for you to sympathize at all with the younger son. But perhaps, too, he had been an obedient son, but expected that his elder brother would inherit the family farm. Then he would be left with 1/2 of whatever cash and personal property was left. And perhaps carousing abroad was a response to the oppression of trying to be someone that he was not. We don't know his motivation for leaving that family. But as I said in the beginning of this sermon, some of us have been a bit of both brothers. Sometimes the good son, sometimes the bad. And I belong to that group. Well, I mean, just look at me. What do I do for a living? I spent most of my life in the goody two-shoes camp. But I spent several years of my life on the wrong side of the family history. I'll have to confess, I grew up in a troubled family. My parents were recovering alcoholics, and while they were sober during my life, the lingering effects of addiction affected our family. And my mother, although she was dry from alcohol, could be very difficult to get along with, and sometimes abusive. I spent much of my childhood trying to anticipate her moods, to get out of her way, and to pacify her. As a young adult, though, the effects of too much hypervigilance, too much parental caretaking took a toll on me. And after my father's death, I left home. I stayed away for some time. I got some help. And I worked to define and strengthen myself. My extended family, my remaining aunts and cousins, were appalled at me. They did not understand what I had done, and I didn't feel good about my choice, but I could not re-enter that relationship honestly and lovingly until I was healthy and ready. And one day, the moment came, I received a call that my mother was in the hospital in Chicago, and I traveled to see her. And I sat on her hospital bed, and I apologized. I had reached a point where who I was not a person who could be unkind to an 80-year-old woman, no matter the history. And I was truly sorry that my journey had hurt her. I looked into her watery but vacant eyes, and I saw that she could not have understood me. She could not have understood my motivation. And so I offered no explanation. She welcomed me. I wasn't surprised. Like the prodigal son, I did expect that she would welcome me back. What was transformational for me was that I had earned my own personal integrity and health, and could have compassion and love for my mother at the same time. It took some time to get to that place. Some of my relatives would say that what I did amounted to abandoning my family and was unforgivable. But from my perspective, I took care of myself and was ultimately accountable for my behavior. My mother never did apologize for her behavior those many years. I didn't seek her apology, nor did I expect it. She died within the year of our reconciliation, and I am blessed that I was there with her when she passed from this world. Perhaps those of you who have always been on the good side of family history will not know what it takes for one to leave home. And those of you from the Prodigal Son camp might find that the elder sons did not have the courage to live by his own conviction, to live by his own dreams. But we need not judge either brother. We don't have to take sides. We can land on the side of being human being. A little good, a little bad, and no matter. Our Father, our God, still and always loves us and welcomes us home.